Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, developments with the war on Ukraine, including evacuations being held in Mariupol. Plus, we'll explore if Elon Musk's free speech approach could run into potential roadblocks and possibly put pressure on other social media platforms.
These social media platforms started, they had a much wider breadth of what people were allowed to post on them.
Then later, we sit down with a professor who won a case against his university after being punished for refusing to use a transgendered preferred pronoun.
A male student approached me after class and demanded that I use female titles and pronouns, and I explained to him that I would not be able to do that.
All these stories and more are coming up next from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We began this half hour in Ukraine, where civilians are being evacuated from the shattered port city of Mariupol. This comes as Russian TV showed a simulated nuclear attack on Western Europe. Dale Hurd is on our top story.
In the battered Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, trapped civilians are finally being allowed to leave. New video posted by city officials appears to show Ukrainian civilians safely escaping after weeks of war. Women and children evacuated from that bombed-out steel plant with the help of the UN and the Red Cross. So far, 100 civilians have escaped, but as many as 1,000 civilians are believed to be still holed up inside, along with Ukrainian fighters, the last stronghold of resistance to the Russian siege against the city. The evacuees passed through Russian-controlled checkpoints before arriving at a Russian camp, on their way to meet with Ukrainian officials. Natalia, an employee at the steel plant, said the shelling was so strong and it kept hitting near us. I was afraid to even walk out and breathe some fresh air. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made an unannounced visit to Ukraine with a delegation of Democratic lawmakers over the weekend, meeting with President Zelensky and his aides for 3 hours late Saturday. Pelosi, the highest-ranking U.S. official so far to visit Kyiv, arrived just days after Joe Biden called on Congress to authorize $33 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine.
We leave with a firmer understanding and more current understanding of what needs to be done, with a deeper appreciation of inspiration from those who are in this fight.
And that fight may get bigger. Russia is sending the message again to NATO nations they face a possible nuclear attack. The Wall Street Journal reports the Kremlin is recasting its war in Ukraine as a broader war between Russia and the West, and seems to be preparing Russian civilians for a possible war with NATO. On the Russian program 60 Minutes, Vladimir Putin's state TV hosted a panel discussion with Russian experts on the feasibility of launching a nuclear attack against Western Europe. New analysis in the influential journal Foreign Policy warns that Joe Biden's strategy to weaken Russia may be leaving Vladimir Putin with no choice but to surrender or double down militarily, raising the possibility of turning the Ukraine war into a much wider one. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
While millions of Ukrainians are fleeing the fighting, not everyone can pick up and go. One American minister is doing what she can to help rescue those with disabilities and special needs trapped by their circumstance. Charlene Aaron is on this story.
More than 50 years ago, a diving accident left Johnny Erickson Tata in a wheelchair, unable to walk. Since then, she has been a strong advocate for people with disabilities. Her latest work, rescuing those stuck in Ukraine since Russia invaded the country. She told us on CBN's Prayer Link about the difficulties many have been facing, calling their plight horrific.
Just imagine if you're a quadriplegic like me. I can't use my hands. I'm in a wheelchair. And if you were on the 7th floor of an apartment building and you were in Mariupol being bombed and there were rocket strikes, it's not like you can jump out of bed, grab a few things, rush out the front door and make a dash for the border. You can't do that. And so a lot of these people with disabilities are stuck in apartment buildings. A lot of them are in basements.
She explained how her ministry is helping get many out.
We've been working with our in-country partner, Galena. Galena and our teams have been out searching for these people, even in the most dangerous eastern parts of Ukraine, to rescue them and get them across the border and to safe haven in not only Poland, but Germany and the Netherlands. And we've evacuated over 300 people with disabilities thus far and caregivers, and we're still active.
Just before the invasion, construction was to begin on a disability center in Ukraine called Johnny's House, designed to meet the spiritual, physical, economic, and social needs of people living with disabilities. While the war forced the ministry to redirect its efforts, it hasn't stopped the outreach.
We quickly pivoted, and all the concrete, all the cement, the cinder blocks, the lumber, everything ready to go for the construction of Johnny's House in Ukraine, we suddenly reallocated and redirected to be used to shore up homes and care facilities for the elderly, to protect people with disabilities. So those items all were put to good use, not in constructing a Johnny's House, but of course barricading people so that they might have a safe haven.
A path no doubt filled with danger.
But just the Christians who are volunteering to drive these buses along the corridors where there is heavy shelling, even the drivers of these vans are taking a great risk.
Meanwhile, Johnny is encouraging believers to pray for those helping with rescue efforts in Ukraine.
These people are exhausted, shell-shocked, but nevertheless, they're practicing Christianity with its sleeves rolled up. And so please pray for Galena and her network of friends and co-workers who are making the valiant and very brave and courageous efforts to go into the most dangerous parts, find these people with disabilities, and bring them to safety.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
As the war rages on, millions of Ukrainians have fled their country. CBN's Operation Blessing is providing them with assistance they need. You can help Operation Blessing in its disaster relief efforts by calling 1-800-700-7000. Let us know that you want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can also write us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. Simply note in the memo line of your check, Disaster Relief Fund. You can text as well. You can text OB Crisis to 71777 and visit our websites, cbn.com or ob.org, to help. And anything you're able to do is greatly appreciated. Now to some other news. The price for diesel hit an all-time high, reaching an average of $5.30 a gallon. The high price could affect inflation as diesel is essential to the supply chain. Nearly all heavy-duty trucks that supply gasoline to stores use diesel fuel. Meanwhile, oil companies are reporting rising profits. Democrats are promising legislation that will allow the Federal Trade Commission to keep an eye on prices and go after oil companies. As of now, the national average of gas is $4.18 a gallon. That is up 6 cents in just the last week. Country music artist Naomi Judd died over the weekend. Her husband, Larry Strickland, confirmed her death along with her daughters, Wynonna and Ashley. It was Naomi and her daughter, Wynonna, that formed the music group The Judds in the 80s. The group won 5 Grammy Awards. The duo split after Naomi was diagnosed with hepatitis C in 1991. She became severely depressed during that time and shared what helped her overcome that depression.
I have faith, I believe in God, and I've gotten through all this stuff because of those 3 things: my faith, my hope, and my belief in an eternal God.
She also became a talk show host in 2005, interviewing people with inspirational stories of faith. Last night, Naomi and her daughter, Wynonna, were inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Naomi Judd was 76 years old. Coming up, we're going to take a look at whether Elon Musk's proposed free speech approach with Twitter could put pressure on other social media platforms. Stay with us. So now that Twitter has accepted Elon Musk's stock buyout plan, will Musk's free speech, free market approach pressure other big tech social media platforms into following his lead? Musk may find some free speech roadblocks ahead, especially in Europe. So what is the billionaire's next move? Eric Peterson, director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Pelican Institute, explains.
I don't know that anybody knows exactly what Elon Musk's next move is, maybe even including Elon Musk. But I definitely think what you're going to start seeing from Twitter is perhaps a rethinking of both their business model and their content moderation policies. From all the tweets that he's been sending out, I certainly think we're going to see a change in Twitter from their content moderation policies, which have shifted drastically from being the free speech wing of the free speech party when Twitter was founded over a decade ago.
Many people expect smooth sailing for Musk and Twitter, yet I saw a report about a proposed law in Great Britain that would require social media companies to censor content that the government deems to be harmful. Your thoughts on that? How might that foil Musk's plans for Twitter in England?
Yeah, I think it's one of the big questions that we have around all these big social media platforms that are operating in lots of different countries, because America is exceptional when it comes to its First Amendment and its free speech principles. The European Union has been making some threats towards Twitter as well, that perhaps they won't allow them if they don't change their content moderation policies. So it's something that Elon Musk is going to have to deal with. And, it'll be interesting to see if he knew quite what he got himself into, because when he bought Twitter.
Well, let's expand on that a little bit, because I know many of the people controlling the levers of power around the world don't like speech that challenges their narratives or their agendas. It seems they're doing all they can to stop this free speech movement. So we could see people in many countries prevented from accessing Twitter, as you mentioned, the EU. So how likely is it that other governments beyond the EU may follow Britain's lead, place Chinese communist-like restrictions on speech? How about elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? Obviously, right, these services aren't available in China, right? One of the largest markets, because of the free speech, sort of implications of them. We're entering a time in technology where it's a good question of whether the EU can even take down Twitter or stop it from being downloaded. You see apps like Telegram, right, which are very popular and being used in Ukraine and Russia right now to spread a lot of information that governments might not want people to see. So I think we're definitely coming to a inflection point when it comes to government's ability to control speech. And I think that's one of the reasons that Musk bought Twitter. I think he, believes that government should take a really light touch to any sort of content moderation or free speech restrictions. And I think he's going to continue to fight across the world on those principles.
Well, let's get into politics a little bit, because we know the big tech companies have funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to Democrats in this country in hopes of influencing law and policy. They also restricted news about Hunter Biden's laptop just before the 2020 presidential election. Musk calls that incredibly inappropriate. A media research poll found that I think about 17% of Biden voters said they'd not have voted for him if they had known more about key issues that went unreported or censored. So how might Musk have an impact on the dissemination of information and news coming into the upcoming 2022 midterm and the 2024 general elections?
Yeah, I would say, right, when these social media platforms started, they had a much wider breadth of what people were allowed to post on them. And as the companies sort of matured and they were brought in for congressional hearings, I think a lot of the political pressure on them has got them acting much more like traditional media companies, right? That, Facebook and Twitter weren't the only people that weren't reporting on that story. But I think somebody like Musk, who has sort of a heterodox opinion from even a lot of those people in Silicon Valley, will sort of show an alternative model where perhaps that not all the big tech companies are in line when it comes to what's allowed on their platform and, who they support politically or just how their companies run.
And quickly, Eric, what role should the U.S. government take in this battle? What should our Congress and president do?
I think this is a great example of showing that a lot of the ideas that have been thrown around for reining in big tech would have been a big mistake. So many people have been arguing for things like Section 230 reform. And I think had Congress acted on some of those ideas that, Twitter might not become the open place that it is today. What we really need is a marketplace of ideas and a marketplace in competition. And I think we're going to see with this that things are going to change pretty drastically in the tech world like they have for the last 20 years.
Okay, free speech and free markets. Eric Peterson, Director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Pelican Institute. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead, see how a professor from the University in Ohio successfully won a case after refusing to use a transgender preferred pronoun in the classroom. We've got the story coming up next. Dr. Nick Merriweather, professor at Ohio's Shawnee State University, successfully sued his university after being punished for refusing to use a transgender student's preferred pronoun. He recently told Bill Hallowell of CBN's Faith Wire that he used prayer and scripture to fight this battle. Here's the story.
This is a fascinating case. You just came off of a settlement, a victory, a $400,000 victory from the university where you were punished for declining to use the preferred pronoun of a transgender student. And can you just sort of start by taking us through the events, what unfolded a few years back?
It was on the first day of class in 2018. A male student approached me after class and demanded that I use female titles and pronouns, and I explained to him that I would not be able to do that. And he got a little bit upset, and anyway, so he threatened to get me fired. But initially, the university had agreed to an accommodation where I would use his proper name, which happened to be feminine, and that we all agreed to, at least I and the administration agreed to that, but the student did not agree to it. And so the administration changed course and decided to require me to use female pronouns and titles with the students. So, you know, that actually is an instance in which I was going to be punished, not for something that I was doing, but for something that I would not do. And that was to affirm the ideology, gender identity ideology. So that is why I was punished by the university, that I would not affirm the ideology.
Now, you had agreed, as you said, to use the preferred name of the person. And this has often been something that comes up, and I do want to talk about your reasoning behind it, but that often comes up in this conversation, that is the workaround, that you can use a person's name. There's no need to use, pronouns outside of that the name is fine. You were fine doing that. What was their reasoning for backtracking on that? Why did that become something that was unacceptable to the university?
Well, I think that what was unacceptable about it was that I was not affirming gender identity ideology, that if I worked around it, I would not be compelled to speak affirmatively about gender identity ideology. I think that really was what was at stake. They said something about it would be unequal treatment if I continued using pronouns and titles that were biologically based. But I think really what this was about, it was not really about the student and pronouns and titles. I think that people make a mistake in thinking that way. It was really about compelling me to speak in a way that conflicted with my beliefs as a Christian and as a philosopher.
And one note on that, if I can jump in.
Sure.
The Biden administration, for example, has recently been putting out guidance on this issue. And one of the documents they referenced talked about the importance of using the names and the pronouns, not just as affirmation, as Dr. Merriweather just mentioned, but as a form of validation.
Right.
So Dr. Merriweather is exactly right. This is about not just trying to reach a live and let live solution. Right. This is about affirming the ideology itself and validating the identity that's being claimed.
It's interesting because it would seem almost as though a Christian could demand then, well, anytime you mention Jesus Christ, make sure you say that he's the Son of God, right? That he's the one true God. Sort of imposing this language on people, and they may not believe that language, right? And in this case, there was a conflict between your faith and what you felt you were being compelled to do in this case. So when there was no longer an agreement, when that was not acceptable, what was the punishment that they gave you at that point?
Well, at that point, because we are in a union, the faculty are in a union at Shawnee State, the only thing that could happen initially was that a letter would be placed in my file. It was a disciplinary letter, and it said if there would be further corrective action if I continued to refrain from referring to a man as a woman or a woman as a man. And so what that certainly could have meant is that the next time that happened, I would have been fired. So the disciplinary measure that was taken was actually just a preparation for my dismissal.
And you can watch the entire interview by going to faithwire.com. You can also catch a new episode of Faithwire on the CBN News Channel this evening at 8:30 Eastern. You can find it anytime on the CBN News app. Coming up, Denzel Washington offers some words of wisdom to some basketball players. We got the story for you. Stay with us. Words of wisdom from actor Denzel Washington are making the rounds on the web. He's sharing a little advice with players from the Miami Heat.
Keep raising the standard by how you carry yourself, as you all do. Keep teaching, keep leading, keep following. Learn from the best. That's what I've done. Try to and pass it on. And I see you all behind hurts. Can't tell you which Egyptians tried it. All they got was robbed.
He was referring to ancient Egyptians who built elaborate tombs, stuffing them full of valuables, believing their riches would be waiting for them in the afterlife. You can get more on this story by visiting cbnnews.com. Time now for your Monday motivation, and it is my prayer this thought will touch you and encourage you this week. Be you. God is looking to bless you, not who you pretend to be or who people say you are. You are who God says you are, and He is waiting for you to be you. With that word, make this a marvelous Monday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel at any time. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Hope you'll see us right back here tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody. God bless.